Thank you. So I'm going to talk about robotics and AI, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a glimpse of where things have been, why things have been so difficult for robots, and where they're going to be in the future. And I want to start by saying that part of the challenge is that most of us have learned or to anticipate what robots and artificial intelligence should look like by watching Hollywood movies. And we've seen all kinds of robots, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, sometimes robots that have some complex relationship with themselves. And all these robots do amazing things, but they're nothing like reality. We haven't seen any of these in reality. In fact, when you look at artificial intelligence, it really looks like this. It's transparent. You can't see it, you can't sense it, you can't smell it. It's odorless, it's everywhere, but we don't see it and we can't really touch it. In fact, a lot of our lives are already governed by AI and robots in lots of different ways. Stock market is governed by artificial intelligence, predictions of the weather, even what song we're going to listen to next and what link we're going to click on is all governed by AI behind the scenes. It makes companies rise and falls. Even test scores and things like that are evaluated by machines. Same thing with robots. We don't see them anywhere. You don't walk the streets and see robots, but robots are out there in the millions making things for us. A lot of manufacturing is done by robots, and in fact, the only robots we do see in our homes are simple robots like these, vacuum cleaning robots that roll around, but don't really do anything like what we had envisioned by Hollywood. So where are the robots and what's happening? So there's a big trend now, a big push in AI that's sort of rippling through the economy. And if you look at just investments in artificial intelligence, you see sort of this exponential curve going up and up. This is up until 2015, 2016. You can see an incredible amount in investment. Even in just 2017, it's increased more than that. There's more and more companies in AI, more companies in robots, more investments for companies. Something big is happening in the world of AI and robotics that is difficult to understand. So I want to tell you today a little bit about behind the scenes, what is happening, what is driving this revolution, and what is the end game. So we've seen a lot of sort of high-profile examples of AI, like AI that can win the game of Jeopardy or even the game of Go, which you might have heard of, the hardest, most difficult board game invented by man, which for many years we used to teach in AI that game is actually too difficult for computers and involve intuition of the sort that machines don't have, and yet computers were able to beat the world champion just a few months ago. So these are examples that are high profile, but behind the scenes there's other more subtle things happening that are really going to change our lives in a profound way. For example, Amazon Go supermarket that has no cashiers, where you just walk in and take whatever you want off the shelf and walk out and you're charged. And that's enabled by AI that can understand what you're doing. And of course, my favorite topic, driverless cars. Cars, fully autonomous driverless cars are here. Pending legislation, everybody will use them in one way or another, and probably you or maybe certainly your children and your grandchildren will never need to learn how to drive. This is an example of a fully autonomous robot that's going to change your lives in a profound way, and not just your lives, but also the way you do e-commerce and where you live and what you do for a living. So why is this all happening now? It's very tempting to say, okay, computers are getting faster, cheaper, and better by the month, and all this AI and robotics technology is sort of riding this curve. In fact, this is what's called Moore's Law, and you can sort of see how computers are doubling their performance every so many months, and this curve keeps on giving, which means computers are getting faster and faster all the time. But beyond that, there's a couple other trends that are happening in AI and robotics that are changing and sort of happening on top of this. So one thing that has happened in AI is that we switched the way we think about AI. Behind the scenes, there has been this war between two schools of thought of how you build intelligent systems. And that war started from the 50s when the first computers were being built. The first approach to AI is a very human way of doing AI, which is that you get computers to do intelligent things like play checkers or chess by programming rules into them. The second approach is what we call machine learning. And this idea here is that you don't program rules into a computer, but you give it examples. And it learns on its own from the example. So to understand what that means, think about how you learn to speak a language. When you're a newborn child, you learn how to speak by listening to examples from your parents and your siblings. When you're in school, you learn a second language by listening, by getting a series of rules and conjugations and verbs and exceptions to the rules and exceptions to the exceptions and so on. These are two ways of being intelligent, rules and learning from examples. And these are sort of the two ways in which AI systems have been explored over the years. So in the first 40 years of AI, people built systems based on rules. And for example, and that works very well for certain things. Every time you navigate, you use a GPS navigator, or you look for the nearest this or that, behind the scene there's an algorithm that's very efficient based on rules, and it's finding the shortest path from A to B and so on, and it works very well. But certain things, turns out, are very difficult to program by rules, especially when it comes to robots that live in the physical world. So it's okay to do certain things, play chess with rules, but it's very difficult to teach a robot how to navigate a busy street or even your home using rules. In fact, when people started programming these robots back in the 70s, they would work with rules. They would work well in the lab, in a clean lab with brightly colored obstacles. But when they took these robots out into the field, these robots were not able to survive in the real world. They still haven't earned their right to be in the real world. So these robots could drive around, could not tell the difference between a road and a sidewalk, what's drivable and what's not drivable. So that was the 70s. And you might think things have improved a lot in the last few decades, but in fact, up until 2005, you fast forward 30 years and the problem still persists. Computers, machines, robots cannot survive in the physical world. They cannot understand what's around them, which is why they only live in factories. This is the DARPA Grand Challenge 2005, where there was a prize for $2 million for the US Defense Research Agency to be given to whoever can write software that will make a car drive across the desert for 150 miles with nobody inside. The car would be empty, you just hit enter, and see what happened. A year earlier, 2004, there were 100 competitors and no car made it more than 7 miles before it fell into the ditch. All the cars fell into the ditch within 7 miles. That's how hard this was. 2005 and comes along. I was at Cornell University, upstate New York at the time. There was a big team of students trying to do this, programming all kinds of rules, but the Cornell vehicle ended up getting stuck here under an overpass because it saw a large object and there was no rule that told it could go underneath the object. So it just stuck there, sat there, cannot compute, didn't know what to do. So this is the situation with rule-based AI, is that what we call corner cases, these rare situations that you don't account for in your rules, but spell game over. Now, in parallel, this world of machine learning keeps growing, and Sebastian Thrun, who led the winning team for the 2005 Grand Challenge, wrote famously, and I quote, "In the end, we start relying on what we call machine learning or big data. That is, instead of trying to program all these rules by hand, we taught a robot the same way we would teach a human driver." In other words, they drove around and they showed the car how to drive. And the car learned. And this is what is happening now with many of these robots. They are not programmed, they are taught by example, and this is why they're taking off. So when you look at robots and AI today, you have to remember this magical combination of data and algorithms that learn, machine learning algorithms. We liken the data to the fuel and the algorithm to the engine. They're both useless on their own, but when you put them together, you can take off. So another reason why we're seeing this growth in AI and robotics now is the exponential growth, not just of computing power, but of data. This is one of my favorite charts that shows the number of cameras sold over the years. And you can see up until 2014 what an exponential curve looks like. And let me zoom out and show you what it really looks at the top. This is 2014, and 2015 is 16, it's through the roof. These are just cameras, but the cameras themselves are getting faster and higher bandwidth and higher resolution. And all of this is fuel for the new AI. And that's just cameras, but you have GPS sensors and motion sensors and you name it, thousands of sensors, and all these sensors that are out there are all producing fuel for these AI systems that keep learning and learning. But that's not the end of the story. Another piece of the puzzle is how to understand this data. And the truth is that big companies always had large, fast computers and lots of data. They just cost a lot. But up until 5 years ago, and most people don't understand, don't realize this, up until 5 years ago, even the best programmers, the best software, the best companies, the best academic institutions, nobody could write software that would look at an image and tell the difference between a cat and a dog. Nobody. Even the FBI, whatever you want, nobody could tell the difference between a cat and a dog reliably. It's such a hard problem. Any one-year-old child can tell the difference between a cat and a dog, but no software could do that. That's how hard the perception problem was for computers. Problem was so difficult that in 2010, the AI community crowdsourced this challenge, and they said, let's see if anybody could write software that could do this. They released 1 million images, labeled images in 1,000 different categories. There were 1,000 images of Spider-Man and 1,000 images of sushi and 1,000 images of swords and so on, 1,000 images of 1,000 different categories, 1 million images in total. They said, here's the data set, download it, write your own software that given new sets of images can put them in the right category, send us the software and we'll see who's the world champion in doing this. So that was 2010. All kinds of people, big companies, small companies, domestic, international, hackers, universities, all sent this software, and nobody could classify correctly more than 75% of the images. In other words, computers got it right 3 out of 4. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be sleeping in the back of a driverless car that gets it right 75% of the time. So we really, now interestingly, 75% of the time is good enough for winning the stock market, it's good enough for winning chess, but it's not good enough for driving a car. So the real world is a whole different ballgame from computers. And that has been the challenge for AI. So 75% it was 2010, 75% it was in 2011. Nobody could crack this. And now you might wonder what's the human performance. Humans can classify correctly 19 out of 20 images. So humans have an error rate of 5%. 2012 comes along, everybody watches the game board, and September 30, a new AI system comes along. We now call it deep learning that brings down the error to 15%, almost half of what it was before. Now, that might not seem a lot to you, 25%, 15%, but this number did not budge for decades, and suddenly it drops by half. This was for the AI community like seeing Jesus. Everybody woke up. I remember my students bursting into my office saying, somebody brought down the ImageNet competition down to 15%. Not only did they do that, they actually, one of the big inventors was Jan LeCun from NYU, here across the street, and they also open sourced the software. They open sourced it in very, very broad terms, so everybody could copy it. The next year, the error went down to 10%. The following year, it almost approached 5%. 2015, it went down to 3.5%. 2016 to 2.9%. And now the competition is too easy for computers. In other words, computers can now understand images better than people. Now, embarrassingly, behind the scenes, it's the same algorithm that this guy tried back in the 1950s, but didn't have enough data. So it's kind of embarrassing. The AI, the brand new AI systems today, they are really, really simple algorithms inside, but they are just fueled by enormous amounts of data. And we call them deep learning just because they are stacked on top of each other, many, many layers deep. So now a computer and a robot finally can understand what's around it. It can look at an image and understand there's a cat, there's a dog, there's a person, there's a chair, and there's another chair, and so on. And this is just the beginning, because computers aren't limited to just RGB images. They can see in the dark, they can see broader range of the spectrum, they can see in higher frame rate, they can see with 20 eyes, not just 2, so this is just the beginning. So when you think about driverless cars, for example, you might wonder, well, how come we never had driverless cars? After all, driverless cars were already displayed in the World Fair in 1939 in Queens. But we've never had them. Why haven't we had them? It's not because we don't know how to control a car from a computer. It's not because we don't know how to calculate the shortest path from A to B. The reason we haven't had driverless cars up until now is because no car could tell the difference between a pothole and an oil spill, or between a toddler and a fire hydrant. These two look very similar to a radar, but no computer can tell the difference between them up until 5 years ago. It's pretty amazing. And we drive very differently next to a toddler on the curb than we do next to a fire hydrant. So it's not just about detecting that there is an obstacle. The AI needs to understand what that obstacle is in order to know how to behave. So now, computers can understand what's around them. They can, in real time, classify things, and it's not because there's some clever programmer that writes special software, it's just because they are trained. If you want a machine to understand and classify different cars and different pedestrians in real time, you just have to give it data and it will learn on its own. So that means there's a ripple effect of these robots on our economy. It's not just replacing drivers and taxis, it's new modes of e-commerce that allow to ship things around without a driver, or even deliver pizza without having to have a whole car. Or you buy goods online and they appear on your doorstep within half an hour with a couple other things that you might want to buy. We're working on drones that fly over cornfields, and they can look at each and every leaf and detect minute signs of disease in much better rate than any experts can. You have robots that now finally can work side by side with humans. And why can they work side by side? Up until now, they were always segregated. They can work side by side with humans because they can see the human. They can recognize the human, and the human can program them because they understand what the human is doing. But if that's not enough, there's one big factor that's even more empowering for robots, and that is the ability of machines to learn from other machines. So for example, when you think about driverless cars, it's not just that a human can have one lifetime of driving experience. A car can have multiple lifetimes because it can learn from every other car. Once one car experiences some weird situation, it can share that experience with all other cars. So the more cars there are on the road, the faster each one of them learns. And that's a very, very different situation from humans. That's very, very unintuitive, but it adds to the exponential growth. So to summarize, there are 4 compounding exponentials that are driving robotics. One is faster, cheaper, and better computers, and that's true at the base, at the core. On top of that, we have new algorithms that were not available before that allow computers to learn, and that underlies a lot of the other technologies you've heard today. For example, speech recognition is all based on this. We have exponential growth in data, and we have the cloud that allows machines to learn from other machines. So what's the end goal, the end game of all of this? I think it's going towards the direction of what we call sentience, so machines that have feelings, machines that actually have self-awareness. And that happens when you imagine all these robots, all these machines, instead of modeling and understanding the world around them, they start modeling themselves. They start looking inwards. So I'll show you one example. This is a robot we have in the lab. It learns how to walk, but it doesn't learn how to walk by being programmed or by doing trials. It learns by learning what it is. So here, we take the volume down just a little bit. Okay, so we have the robot that learns how to walk. It flails around a little bit and it begins to imagine what it actually is. Here you can see the robot after about 2 days beginning to figure out that it has 4 legs. It doesn't quite know where they're connected, but it's beginning to understand what it is. And this is about 4 days into the process. It flails around a little bit and it figured out that it has 4 legs and how they're connected. It then uses that self-image that it's created of itself with all this AI to figure out creatively how to move forward. And frankly, we were hoping to get an evil spidery walk, but instead we get this lame way of moving forward, which is not showing. There you go. So this is not synchronized at all. All right. So we're seeing how it learned how to move on its own. And here again, it's learning. So what we did here is do something very cruel. We chopped off a leg of this robot, and we watched what happened. And you can see that robot also loses a leg, and it gradually its self-image also begins to sort of adapt. And here it is moving forward without this leg. And I know it's very sad, but we did put the leg back on, and it learned how to move. So that's the future of AI and robotics, machines that don't only learn to understand the world around them, but really the machines that begin to understand what they are. Thank you.